Hey friends. I had a really great day. I suppose this is officially my COVID day 6, and I'm feeling essentially back to normal. I'm still occasionally coughing, but I'm really pretty good, feeling pretty good. And and so all the rest of the shows for the weekend have been canceled, which means I will not be jumping back in until next week. I might have told you guys this yesterday, but that's official now. And so all of a sudden, I found myself in the position of, thinking I was about to launch out of my COVID vacation, as I've been calling it, back into the work, back into the show. And instead, I'm now looking at another 1, 2, 3, 4 days before anything happens. And and so I started kind of just, clocking that for myself and trying to observe how that feels, like what happens to me as I feel that. And one of the things that sort of, so I'm experimenting with, like, okay, well, what do I do when I have just time and right now I had thought that this time was going to be occupied with a certain kind of work, and now it's not. Okay, so what does Robin fill that time with, was my question to myself. And I think I was influenced by watching these Sadhguru videos recently, the one, I think I talked about it yesterday, where he basically says our goal should not to be motivated. We should not want to be motivated. We shouldn't be asking ourselves, how can I get motivated? Because in the whole construct of motivation, there's this sense of needing to overcome some form of inherent friction. Well, that inherent friction is not natural. If a human being simply showing up to be a full human being naturally accomplishes everything. That doesn't mean there's no effort, but it means the resistance to expressing ourselves fully is not a thing, is not a real thing. And now, so then the question becomes, well, what is that resistance, and how do we, if we are experiencing that resistance, well, then what's the way out of that predicament? I mean, that's like what is enlightenment? What is the spiritual path? Those are big questions. But what I was kind of gleaning from this today was, well, what do I naturally want to do? Instead of asking myself, what should I do with this time, now that I have a bunch of time? What do I most naturally want to do? And what showed up very quickly and very kind of easily was, I want to sit down and meditate for a while. I want to sit down and just observe my mind. That was a video where Sadhguru was talking about his early experiences and his enlightenment experiences, where he would just sit and take an endless natural fascination in his mind, in what was happening in his inner world. And that sparked something for me, and so I thought, okay, let me sit down. And so I sat down, and I sat for a long time, almost 2 hours, and I find myself in that time having an interesting experience. I found myself having the experience of kind of traveling between two states. One state is the state of what I would call consciousness, where it's like I am connected to the source of my own consciousness. It's like I am my own consciousness. There's no separation. And from that place, it's like watching the mind is like watching a child play on the playground, or watching a pet animal go for a walk on a trail or in the woods. It's like I have a perspective of some objectivity. I'm just watching the mind do its thing, and and in that state, in that place, I am kind of endlessly fascinated by the mind, and I'm endlessly fascinated by, oh, what's it getting up to now? Oh, what's it doing here? Oh, look, it's doing the same thing again. It did this thing about 15 minutes ago. Look, it's doing it again. And there's this like very there's just a delight in witnessing the patterns of the mind, the habits of the mind, the mechanics of the mind, how it works, what it's doing, all the infinitely different ways that a similar tendency might express itself through thought or through little attachments or whatever. There's a whole laundry list of observations I made in that department, but that's kind of like one of the two states that I'm in. And certainly that was a state where like I could certainly describe it as being fascinated by my mind, or by my consciousness. But then there's another state that I would also occasionally tilt into, which was actually kind of getting attached to certain thoughts or certain trains of thought. And I watched my mind kind of grab hold of them and then walk the path for a little while. And again, this is kind of like, again, it's like fascination, but rather than the sort of wakeful fascination of being in a very conscious state, this was more like the hypnotic fascination of being, hypnotized by the mind. Somehow drawn into an identity with my thoughts that was clearly somehow, there was some measure of delusion going on, some measure of self-delusion. In other words, I was letting myself be seduced by this train of thought. And what of course, maybe not of course, but what they all had in common was the theme. It was like variations on the theme of why Robin is good enough. It's like, so, and that was very identifiable. Like that's the chorus. That's what the chorus is saying. If there's a Greek chorus in my mind, they're constantly echoing, Robin is good enough. Here's why Robin is good enough. Look at Robin. Look at how Robin did this. Didn't he do great? There's this constant affirmation of my good enoughness. And you know, but clearly in that, inherent in that is the concession slash confession that on some level the mind doesn't believe it. Because why are we having to say it over and over again? Why do I need 19 different video trailers of why Robin is good enough if he already believes it? Why does he have to go to the movies and watch the like hype videos to convince himself of that if he already actually believes it, you know? And so of course there's this part of me that in that it's kind of a humbling experience of like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. Let me just receive that, right? Let me just receive that message and not, you know, the kind of interesting thing about today was because I framed my intention for the meditation really very open-endedly. It was like all I sat down with the intention to do was observe my mind. I was like, that's it. I'm not here to do a practice. I'm not here to maintain focus. I'm not here to obtain any kind of result. I'm just here to observe. I'm just curious to observe what my mind does. See if I see anything interesting. And so and what I found were these two different states. You know, this one state where I was truly deeply present and deeply connected, and this other state where it was like I got sucked into the, and the eyes start spinning like the snake in the Jungle Book, and you're kind of like mesmerized for a while. And you know, so I guess, you know, this is none of this is incredibly new insight to me, but spending some time there today and really giving my attention to that, just giving it my attention felt really good. It felt like I was just leaning into my own reality in a really comforting way. You know, and it was like I wasn't. Oh, well, the other thing I observed was a fair amount of judgment. You know, like as I then started to see the chorus, the Greek chorus of Robin is good enough, and I started to mentally observe, just recognize that, and say, oh wow, I see myself going to great lengths to affirm my value. What's going on here? Very quickly, the pattern would then shift to some form of judgment. And sometimes the judgment would be directed at me. I'd be judging myself. Other times the judgment would be directed outward. I'd be judging someone else or something else. But in either case, it was like I went from observation to judgment because there was something in the being seen. It was like I was being seen by myself. My own evasive maneuvers were being witnessed by me, and then they had to justify themselves, right? Then they have to sort of come up with an alibi for why they're there, why, you know, what they're doing. Well, it's because this is wrong about you. This is bad. This is, you know, fascinating to just sit and see what the mind does under the steady gaze of observation. You know, and I think I've also found a pretty good activity for the next couple days. I mean, I'm sure I'll get up to other stuff as well, but I realized I haven't done really long meditations like this for quite a while, and they have such a profound impact. And if I'm given the gift of time right now, it's an awfully good way of using it, is to come back to some of those. You know, I even hesitate to call it a practice, because I don't really want to turn it into a practice where I'm, you know, a practice kind of proposes the notion of an outcome or a goal, whereas this is actually just an impulse to direct my attention in a certain direction because it's interesting to me, because there's insight there, and there seems to be something glinting. It's like looking into the sand and seeing something kind of shiny under the surface of the, kind of like underwater, under sand, like there's something glinting down there. Let me go look at that. Let me go see what that is. So yeah, that's where I have arrived to today, as I prepare for a couple more days of not doing the show. So anyway, thanks for watching, folks. Love you very much. This conversation means the world to me. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you deeply. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.